Good lunchtime, everybody, and welcome to Friday with Friends. I'm your host, Simon Brooks, and with me, right here, is my good old friend. I've been doing this. I've done this a few times. It's my good friend who we met in Boston years and years ago, Laura Packer. And Laura Packer is a phenomenal storyteller. She's a formidable teacher, and I mean that in a really good way. And she's just incredible, just an incredible woman. I can't say enough about her.
I'm so happy to be here with you today, Simon. Thank you. And all those things you're saying about me, except for the woman part, they apply to you too. You.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
There.
Yes, I'm there. I know it's all a bit backwards. I used to own a medium format camera. It was a what was it? I can't remember, but it was one of the ones that you look down on. You didn't look through it wasn't a prism that you looked through. And when you look down on it, if you moved to the right, the whole image would go to the left. And I got so used to that. And when I started doing this, I was like, oh, it's just the Yashica. That's what I had. It was the Yashica C330. And I loved it. Absolutely beautiful camera. It got stolen with a bunch of other stuff, so I don't have it anymore.
That's unfortunate. I hope whoever has it falls over while they're using it and just doesn't deserve it at all.
Oh no, I hope they're getting some good use out of it. I would rather that the case than them falling over it and damaging the camera.
All right, be generous.
So what are you up to these days, Laura? What have you been up to?
I'm still about 5'2".
Okay.
And other than that, I am telling stories live on Facebook a lot of the time. I'm Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm teaching quite a bit via Zoom, which I have discovered is just a wonderful teaching tool. And doing stories live via Zoom is also just great. Zoom is a very different experience than Facebook, but the Zoom concerts I've been doing have been terrific because it has this lovely sense of intimacy that you don't even really get in an in-person concert, even a small one. So I'm really enjoying that. I'm working on a couple of creative projects that I'm having a lot of fun with. I'm working on more
Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, sure. I don't have the product with me right now, but I recently published a deck of cards called Story Seeds cards. Which
I saw those.
They're neat little creative prompts for anyone who wants to use them. There's some gameplay. There's stuff about using them for writing or story prompts. And the main deck is a 56 card deck, and it's general. It has prompts for personal stories or fairy tales or myths or scary stories or whatever you may want. So I'm actually deep in the weeds working on two different expansion packs. One is fairy tales, and one is scary stories. And I'm collecting ideas now for the personal stories expansion pack as well. But it's a lot of fun because it's graphic design and it's a chance to play and really try and make my imagination stretch as much as possible.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. So I have to say something. So some people might think, well, that's kind of different, but people that don't know you won't know that you're very much into games and gaming and card playing, aren't you?
Well, I like games. I really like games. But what I think is important is that we all get stuck sometimes. So having tools that can help us get unstuck, I think, is really valuable because there certainly are times in anyone's life when they're stuck for a good long time, when things are just difficult and you're not going to be able to be very creative. But if you're hungry to be creative and you've just been feeling a little down or the world has been big or you've had too much work to do, a little tiny seed can just help it sprout to before to death a little bit. So I think there's something very valuable in something small and visually interesting that really can help you get going again. Yeah, so that's been my big creative project lately.
And that's something that you started how did you start doing that? Because I've seen it on Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of stuff for a long time.
So I've been doing Story Seeds initially on Facebook and Twitter, and then it expanded to Instagram for at least 5 years, probably longer, though not under that name. I would say 10 years, though not under that name. And honestly, Simon, it started because I was feeling creatively stuck. And so I decided that I wanted to try and create some interesting little image on a daily or near daily basis just to see what I can come up with as a way to get myself going again.
Yeah.
And it worked. And I
Nice.
started sharing them, and people enjoyed them, and it seemed like something that would be really fun to do. The cards are available on Etsy. You can actually purchase them from Etsy.
Okay.
At etsy.com/shop/storylara. I should have mentioned that to you already. Here,
Well, that's I can
I
do
can put
that.
it.
Hang on.
You can do it. So
Yeah.
etsy.com/shop/storylara. Thank you for asking, Via. I appreciate it.
/shop/
Storylara, one word. Hi, Joey. Hi, Robin. Hi, Via. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Mo. Delightful to see you all here.
Let me get rid of. Robin's great. I love Robin. She's excellent. Talbot, nice. Hi, Joey.
So the cards are. I'm irked with myself. I had a deck on my desk, but I gave them away 2 days ago, so I don't have a deck. Oh, wait. I think I lied. Haha. So I can show a couple of these to you.
So I've actually followed some of your prompts. I mean, I've never used them. Your library has a listing for your autobiography. You have no memory of. I like that.
So, and then there are things like this.
Do they? Okay. So do they have some of your photography? Who are these people and what are they
Some of
talking
them have
about?
my photos. And then there's some that are related to fairy tales.
I got a cow for 5 beans. Wonder what if I can get 4 of these? Are those jelly beans?
Actually, they're mixed beans, but jelly
Okay.
beans work too. Then you get a gummy cow. There are some of my photos in there, but honestly, a lot of them are images that are either freely available or that I've paid for.
Yeah,
But there are some of my own photos in there. We have a shared love of photography as well.
We do. One of the things that surprised me is that it didn't really surprise me actually, but it was kind of like, oh, this is really cool. Not the fact that you're into photography, but just the fact that you have a really good eye for it, a natural eye for it. I mean, I've seen a lot of people that put stuff up and it's kind of like, they got the camera and they just take a shot and that's it. But you've really got an eye for it, and I've really enjoyed looking at. Did I get that right? Etsy.com shop story, Laura.
You did, yes.
Okay,
Actually,
good.
it's Etsy, not Etsy. ETSY.
All right, let's change that.
But thank you for saying that, Simon. Photography was actually a very big part of my childhood. My father was a passionate amateur photographer, and he had some very nice equipment. This, of course, was long before digital cameras, so it was all film. And he set up a dark room in the bathroom of our apartment when I was like 5 years old or something like that. And so I have these very clear memories of being in the dark room with him and the red light that would shine down on everything and watching the image slowly appear in that developing pan like magic. And the sharp smell of those chemicals, too.
Yeah, I can. I haven't been in a dark room in a long time. When we moved to New England, well, when I was in Portland, when Sarah and I, my wife and I, lived in Portland, Oregon, a friend of mine sadly was going through a divorce, and he stored all of his equipment at my house. So I had this arrangement with him that I gave him a key to the house and set up a dark room in our laundry room. The laundry room wasn't really a laundry room; it was a space where there was a washer and a dryer and a big sink between the kitchen and the garage. And so I just put up a shelf and put up the enlarger, and oh my gosh, I would spend, I'd take photos and process them, but then I'd spend like a whole day and I'd come out reeking of the chemicals.
Yeah. Yep.
But there's such a magic to it. It's well, for me there's a magic to it. And I think I don't know if you feel the same, but with digital photography, you don't touch anything, right?
No.
You basically upload it onto the computer. If you want to faff around with it on the computer, you do, and then you print it out. There's no human contact to it. Whereas when I do my work with film, I would have my hands on the film. I'd have my hands on the film when it was dried, and the hands on the paper, and sometimes you'd rub the paper hard to like get some small detail to come out. And I think there's definitely something about a real photograph. See, I still call it a real photograph versus a digital image.
Well, I think for me, part of the magic one of the what I'm a fan of creative limitations sometimes.
Hmm.
So I have, with all of my digital photographs, or almost all of them, what I'm interested in is seeing what I can do with the camera, and
Right.
that's it. The most I'll do digitally afterwards is I don't process them generally. I might
Hmm.
crop them a little bit because it
Right.
seems like that's something you could do with paper or with film. But I'm
Right.
really interested in developing skills that make me a better photographer, not because I'm skilled with Photoshop, and there's
Right.
nothing wrong with using those tools, nothing at all. But
Yeah.
it's been an interesting challenge for me learning how to develop my eye and how to understand the tools that I have in front of me. And so while I never did photography with a darkroom, I had a little point and shoot camera when I was a kid. Um, it's I think because of my experience with my father and watching how he worked with these materials, it has informed how I take pictures now, because I'm
Mm.
interested in what can I do with what I have in front of me with the physical parts of it. Um, there's certainly times I've played with photos and manipulated them digitally, and it's a lot of fun doing that, and it's important to know how, I think.
Yeah.
But for me, the real delight in it comes in what can I do if I pretend I don't have those tools? It's
Right.
like being
Right.
a song. Yeah, what can I do in that restriction?
No, I totally agree with you there. I think it will make you a better photographer because you'll figure out the process of what makes a good photograph in the taking, as opposed to like, well, it's almost good, so I'm going to tart it up now.
Mhm. And I
I,
think that kind of habit applies to storytelling as well,
yes.
because as storytellers, we need to be able to be good in the moment. And so
Yeah.
we need to understand how to use the tools that we have immediately in front of us. And so that philosophy carries through other arts that I engage in.
Yes. I think that's a true statement as well. I think there's that presence as well.
Mhm.
I think you have to be, when you're taking pictures, you have to be very present, and you're really focused on what you're doing. And I think it's very much the same with storytelling.
Mhm.
You
It
can't
is.
just get up there and I mean you can, but it comes across as like you're making it up as you're going along.
But it's also about building the relationship in the moment, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
in storytelling, so much of what makes an effective and effectively told story is that the teller has an awareness of the audience, right? So
Right.
we are connected to the audience, even if we have this kind of medium that we're working through. So we are working through a lens here.
Right.
Um, but we need to be acutely aware of our audience, and so it's about building that relationship. It's the same thing with photography.
Hmm.
Whether I'm taking a picture of a landscape, because every photo I take reflects me. If I'm taking
Yes.
a picture,
Yeah.
look, here's a picture of a field. Well,
Right.
choices that I make are visible in that. So it is about the relationship I have with the
Yeah.
field, the relationship I have with that moment. And I like taking a lot of pictures of animals. So last year we had a family of owls in the little woods behind our house, and they brought up their babies there. And I took hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of these fledgling owls, who are not the tame little owls that you see in many photos on Facebook where people have rescued owls or whatever. These were
Right.
owls who did not like it when I was near them. So every photograph that I took, especially if they were photos where they were aware of me,
Uh-huh.
were about building that relationship. So again, it's the same set of skills. It's
It
about building
is.
a relationship. And Mo, you're right. Storytelling in the moment is key.
It is very key. I think if you're not in the moment, you start to lose the audience. Because you're not engaging with them. You're not there, and you're not there for the story. You're not there for the audience, and it's just it's like a balloon just going off. Everybody just watches it, and it's like, all right, let's do something else now.
Yeah. Yep.
It's a bad analogy. I'm not very good with analogies.
It works. It works. Look, there's the balloon. Yeah, the balloon is not interacting with us. Though we have a relationship with that balloon because we're
We
watching it.
do.
So
Yes, that's true. That's true.
yeah. Via, I'm glad you're going to go over to Etsy. If there are any issues or you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch.
Yes, and I'll put up your going all over the place here. Where's your banner? There it is. So yeah, if you need to get in touch with Laura, you can get in touch with her at her website. There is a contact page, which if it's anything like my website, is basically an email that gets sent to you.
Yeah.
And also, if you want to support Laura in this great time of no audiences, great way to do that is to go onto Patreon and subscribe or pay a one-off to get some access to some of her stuff that's there for patrons only. She's an amazing teacher, an amazing artist. So definitely poke around in those places. So one of the things when we first met and I first saw you telling stories was the way that you were able to bring in a personal tale, but then migrate it through into a folk and fairy tale, or vice versa. You tell a folk and fairy story, and then you'd come out with another story, which would be a personal narrative. But they would blend so closely, and sometimes you've done tales which actually do, mix the two forms together. Do you want to tell people? I mean, Mo does this, and I want her to see you do something along those lines and talk about it, because it's a really amazing thing what you do, I think.
Well, I think that folk and fairy tales have been around for so long because we need them. And I think we need them in lots of ways. And I'd be happy to share a story, but I want to get this thought out first. We need them both because they are instructional about how to make our way through a difficult world. And humans really, we understand the world through metaphor. Metaphor is a big part of how our brains work, metaphorical thinking. We need them because they tell us that others have survived. They are the roadmap through the forest. And we need folk and fairy tales because they help us feel like we are part of something greater than ourselves, and yet our very smallness is still visible. So we are part of this great big world and huge tradition, and yet this child makes it through the woods. This fool finds a way through. So it tells us that even in our smallness, we still have meaning. So in terms of human need, people are always going to need metaphorical language, whether that's folk and fairy tale or science fiction or fantasy or whatever it may be, myth, religion, all of that. We need all of that. In terms of personally, it's a lot of fun. It's great fun to be able to play with these kind of wild images and see where I can go with it. And it's also, it gives me a way to talk about some really difficult things without making the audience feel like they can't come along with me. Personal narrative is profoundly important and meaningful, but if I'm talking about a really difficult, intimate thing, it may be difficult for the audience to go on that journey with me. I'm not going to tell the story now, it's far too long, but a story I love is called Blood Woman. And it's a woman telling her tale at an indeterminate part of her life, but she's telling the story of her life from when she was an adolescent through part of her first marriage. And as an adolescent, and this gives nothing away about the story, she discovers that if she is cut and if the blood falls from her body, it turns into rubies. And that her tears, if they fall from her body, they leave her skin, they turn into diamonds.
Oh my
and
gosh.
She keeps it a secret, right? She keeps it a secret. Only her mother finds out. And the whole story is about abuse and about what will we do to survive and what will we do to protect the ones we love. But if I were to tell a 45-minute story, fairly weighty story about being abused as a child, then being in an abusive marriage, and what do you do to get out of that, it's a valuable and important story, but it may be extremely difficult for some audiences to listen to. But because it has this magical element woven into it, then it becomes more accessible to audiences. And frankly, it becomes easier for me to tell because it gives me just a little bit of distance that makes it possible for me to tell that story effectively. So those kinds of, and there are other delightful, fun, playful ways that you can do it too. But being able to use metaphoric language gives us a way to talk about stuff we might not be able to easily talk about otherwise. And yet, because they're basic human experiences, our audiences need to hear about them. That was a lot of soapboxing.
No, I think it's important to talk about that kind of stuff. Because there are some really powerful stories that we need to tell to help other people that might be going through these kinds of issues. And I think,
or even not, because even if it's not an identical issue, we've all had difficult times. And
Yeah.
even if my difficult time is not the same as your difficult time, knowing that I survived my difficult time means you might survive yours.
Right, right. And it also helps other people who know people that are going through those things and help
Yes, very
them
much so.
understand it on a much deeper level.
Mhm,
As someone that suffers from depression, I was
mhm.
um, I was chatting with a colleague of ours, and I'm not going to mention their name because they might not want it out that they suffer from depression. But um, I was reaching out to them because this COVID time is really hard for everybody, and I was just like I got to make sure that this person's okay. So I reached out, and they were like, "Yeah, I'm all right," and I was like, I know what it's like because I too suffer from this. And then they were like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
They had there was a little bit of back and forth because when you try to talk to some people about that kind of stuff, they don't get it unless they've gone through it.
And, it opens the door. Sarah says that I am echoing.
I just saw that.
Um,
Why?
I don't know why I'm echoing. I don't hear it right now.
I
I'll
don't
try to
either.
speak a little more softly, maybe that will help.
Can you turn the volume down on your speaker, maybe?
Yes, I
Be a bit
can.
quiet, but
Alright.
hopefully,
How's that?
I don't know. Sarah, is that a bit better? You need to talk a bit more, maybe, Laura.
Well, I hope it's better. I
Okay.
need to make it just a hair louder, so, Simon, I hope I can hear you.
Okay. Oh
Better
yeah,
now?
she says
Great.
you're better now. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Thank you, Sarah.
Um, depression, yes, so what I have found is when I'm willing to be vulnerable
Hmm.
and tell those difficult stories, whether it's a directly personal story, like I have some stories about my first husband's death
Hmm.
and the grief that followed it, which was pretty big. Um, or it's a metaphorical story where everyone actually knows what I'm talking about because people are not stupid. But it creates an opportunity to feel like we have some common ground. And I've told stories about depression as well. In fact, the first story that I told that I knew was a really important one
Hmm.
was a story about being suicidal, but it's woven in with an encounter with Coyote. Um, and so it's a magical realism story, even though it starts with me being about to jump off a bridge.
That's
Um,
on your first
and
CD, isn't it?
what was that?
Is it on your first
It
CD?
is. It
Okay.
is. I can't tell it to you now because it's a coyote story and we're in warm weather, so I won't do
Yeah,
that.
that's fine. That's
Um,
good.
but it's every single time I tell that story, every single time someone comes up to me and says some variant of, I never knew anybody else ever felt that way, or no one else has ever talked to me about feeling that way. And it's gotten to a point where if I know I'm going to tell that story in concert, I
Hmm.
write down on some 3x5 cards the number 1-800-SUICIDE because I know someone's going to need it.
Oh, wow. That's
Mhm.
a good idea. I've
Yeah.
not, yes, I like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never talked about my depression in front of an audience performing. But,
It's
I mention it in
you
schools
don't
because I
have
know that
to.
well, sometimes I do in schools if I'm working with a group of like, high schoolers, because I know that there's a lot of, danger there. And, when some of the stories that they're, if we're working on personal narrative, some of those stories, they carry a hint. Sometimes you'll see a hint of it.
Mhm.
And so I won't mention that I see it in someone's story, but I'll talk about my own experience with it
Right.
and all the great things that I've actually done in my life. Because you know I stepped off a moving train and somebody
Mm.
pulled me back in, and I would have missed out on a whole lot of life if I'd stepped out there. And people need to know that it doesn't always that there's a lot more to life than
Yeah, I'm glad somebody grabbed me and pulled me back in.
yeah. Me too. Me too.
Yeah, yep.
So, do you want to tell a story after all
I
that
would be happy to share a story with you.
dark conversation? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please welcome Laura Packer. What's the story?
So this is called retellings. And I thought that this would be a nice story for this setting in particular, because I know a lot of storytellers are watching. So this story is as much about the craft of storytelling as as anything else. Not so long ago, in the before when we still could travel, I found myself in San Francisco. I was there for work, and I was delighted because I have to tell you, I love the Bay Area. I love the climate. I love the ocean. I love the way that you drive over a ridge and it's like you're in a whole different world. And I love the city of San Francisco itself. It is so broad and varied and deeply, deeply interesting to me. Well, when I arrived, I got settled in my hotel and decided that I would go for a walk because that's what I do after I get settled in a hotel in a new city, I go for a walk. And so I set out and walked and walked and walked. I saw some beautiful buildings and people in amazing West Coast clothing and some incredible smells from restaurants wafting by. But more than anything else, what I was really struck by were how many homeless people I saw. Now, California, the Bay Area, if you're homeless, it's a pretty good place to live because the climate isn't particularly punishing and the laws are set up such that they recognize that sometimes people become homeless and they might need to live on the streets. So it's not that legally challenging a place to live either. Now, I've always believed that when you see a homeless person and they ask you for money, ask me for money, even if I can't give them anything, that this is still a person, a human being. And so it is my responsibility, my obligation to treat them like a human being and to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't right now, or at least to make eye contact and to nod my head to recognize that this is a person reaching out to another person. And that walk in San Francisco, I did that a lot. No, I'm really sorry. I don't have anything right now, but good luck. No, I'm really sorry. I don't have any cash on me, but good luck. You know, I'm really sorry. I hope things get better. Have a good day. On and on and on, over and over again. And it got harder still because I wandered into the Bowery. Now, the Bowery is part of San Francisco where a lot of people without much money live, where a lot of people live on the streets. And it has its own kind of community, but an outsider like me, I'm a source of income, and that's understandable. But it meant that hundreds of people had their hands out. And in not too long, I grew exhausted. I was so weary of the poverty and the pain and of being asked over and over and over and over again and of saying, no, I'm sorry, no, good luck, but hey, I hope things work out. And hearing myself with this false cheerfulness in my voice, I had to leave. So I turned and I left and I was walking out of the Bowery and I'd gotten past the gauntlet of people in need when I saw her a block up in front of me. And she saw me too. I mean, honestly, she was hard to miss. She was wearing a pink sweatsuit, pink sweatshirt, pink sweatpants. She had on sneakers that were probably 3 sizes too big. And she saw me coming. She had her gaze on me a block away. And by the time I was half a block away, she had her hand out. Hey, lady, can you help me? Lady, I just need a little something. Lady. And I didn't say anything. I looked away. And I walked by. I don't like that story. I do not like that story. I don't like that story. I would prefer if it were a story something like this. I was in San Francisco not too long ago for work, and I love the Bay Area. So after I got settled in my hotel, I decided to take a walk. Now I saw amazing buildings and people, and the sky was a bright, clear blue. But more than anything, I saw homeless people, and every single one of them in need, their hand out. And I've always believed that you treat homeless people like people. So even if I don't have any money, I make eye contact. I say hello. I try and recognize that this is a person asking me for something, not just a noise in the city. But by the time I was walking through the Bowery, I was getting so tired that I didn't really know what to do. And I walked as fast as I can to get out saying, no, I'm sorry, not today. Sorry, not today. Good luck to you, as quickly as I could. And I saw her a block away and I know she saw me. There she was in her pink sweatsuit, her hand out by the time I was within half a block of her. Lady, can you help me? Lady. And so I did what I did all along. I looked at her and said, I'm sorry, but I don't have anything. Good luck. And she dropped her hand and glared at me in disappointment. When I got back to my hotel, I took a long shower and decided that next time I went for a walk, I would make sure that I had a little more money in my pocket. Now, I don't really like that story either. The story I wish I could tell you is something like this. I was in San Francisco not so long ago for work. After I was settled in my hotel, I went for a walk, and I love walking around San Francisco. It's a fascinating city. And I found myself wandering through the Bowery, that part of the city where so many people in need live. And so many of them asked me for help. Now, I've always believed that the minimum I can do, the least I can do, is look at them, make eye contact as I tell them that I don't have anything today and wish them luck. And so I did that again and again and again. And I was almost done with my walk when I saw her there in front of me in her pink sweatsuit, dirty, stained. And by the time I was half a block away, she had her hand out. She was the last homeless person. I could see none beyond her. And so when she said, "Lady, hey, lady, can you help me out? I'm hungry." I looked at her for a moment. And then I ran across the street to McDonald's, and I got a couple of meals. I got one Whopper meal, not Whopper meal, one Big Mac meal, I never remember, and one chicken sandwich, and I got a soda and a milkshake and fries and got a little bit of lots of things. And then I came over to her and said, "Do you want some lunch?" She grabbed one of the bags and ripped it open and started eating. And I said, "Do you mind if I join you?" And I sat down on the ground and ate with her. Well, she finished her lunch long before me, and I have to tell you, it was like one of those incredibly awkward dates where you realize about 30 seconds in that you have nothing to say to each other, but you can't really leave yet. And so we both sat there, awkward. I finished my lunch. I bundled up the trash. I stuck it into my pocket, and then she stood up and said, "Come on, I've got something I need to show you." She started walking away, pulling her carriage filled with her treasures after her. And she stopped when she was about 10 feet away and said, "Come on, I got to show it to you." And so I stood up and I walked along behind her. Now, we were out in the middle of the city street. There was no worry, no danger. And we walked along for that half a block that I'd walked to get to her. And then she turned and started going uphill. And I have to tell you, those hills in San Francisco, they really are steep. And she was moving ahead of me at a mile a minute. She was used to doing this. I was huffing and puffing behind her. When she got to the next cross street, she stopped and looked at me with this kind of disgusted look on her face. And when I finally met her, panting to catch my breath, she said, "Come on, it's not so far." And then she turned and we walked along another street parallel to the hill, and then up the hill again and over the ridge and down, down, down until we found ourselves in Chinatown. I love Chinatown in San Francisco. Some of the oldest architecture left in San Francisco from the 1906 earthquake is there in Chinatown. And you can see decades of history and immigration, of hope and promise there laid out on the street and in the very windows of the buildings. We wandered along one of the streets through open air markets, listening to that sound of many different languages rattling in the air around us, smelling the tropical fruits that I could not name, the pink ones and the orange ones and the golden ones. And then she turned down a smaller street, a street that looked far more residential. And then she stopped in front of an alley. And she said, "It's down there. You got to go look." The alley was narrow, and the buildings 4 and 5 stories above it made it dark and permanently shadowed. There was a trickle of, I don't want to call it water, gray-green fluid running down the alley, and it had that smell that every alley seems to have of garbage and urine and time. I looked at her, and she said, "You got to do it, you know." And I guess I had to. I started walking down the alley. There were balconies on some of the windows above me. And on one of them, high up above, there was a woman cutting up a chicken with a butcher knife. thwacking at it with a cleaver, and I could hear the thunk as the cleaver cut into the wood. I saw her see me and then choose not to see me. And still I walked further down, avoiding that trickle, avoiding the indescribable piles. And I noticed when I first stepped into the alley, this blue wall at the very end, the color of blue of the sky on a perfect autumn day, slats of wood that had clearly been painted over and over again, and now someone had painted it this hopeful blue. And I looked back, and she was still there, watching me. She hadn't gone into the alley with me. When I got closer to the wall, I saw that there was a little step at the base of it, and then a cutout, a small oval cutout, so I could look in. And when I got to the wall, I looked back, and she gestured me on. I stepped up and pulled myself up so I could look through that oval. And the first thing I noticed was the aroma, the smell of rich soil and green growing things, of clean water, the smell of freshly cut wood. And I could see that the garden walls there within were made of fresh new boards. I could see the vines trailing up the stakes and the wall, and flowers of so many colors, and beans, and the beginnings of gourds, and all of this life. It was breathtaking. I'm not sure how long I stood there looking at this beauty, at the green of the leaves, at the reds of the flowers, at the deep darkness of the soil. I was about to turn to thank her when I heard the sound like wings, and I saw the shadow of a bird, a big bird overhead. And when I turned around to look, she was gone. Thank you.
Wow. That is such a good story.
Well, thank you. I thought it might be a good thing for this because it's about the stories we tell.
Yeah.
And it's about the process. And I will add actually that almost everything in that story is true to one degree or another. It may not have been true in that moment, but I've eaten a lot of McDonald's lunches with homeless people, and I've had some of them show me amazing things in the city.
Wow. That's just See what I mean, people? See what I mean about Laura Packer? There's the mythical thing in there. It's everything. It's just wonderful story. Wonderful
Well,
story.
thank
Mo
you.
seems that Mo liked it too.
I'm glad you liked it, Mo. Joey, I'm glad you liked it too.
Oh, there's Joey. Yeah, the gauntlet. Yeah, that's popped to my mind as well. The gauntlet of all those people. That was such a nice choice of words. Treasures, yeah. So a riddle wrapped in mystery. Side an enigma. We got some good comments here, girl.
Yeah, I'm glad you all enjoyed it.
That's excellent. Thank you, everyone.
So by telling those kinds of stories, we give ourselves and our audiences permission to perhaps have a bigger view of the world.
Yeah.
Every homeless person I've ever met, and I've met a lot of them, has some kind of story about how they got there. It's not like they were born and immediately sat on a corner and started begging. I mean, that some of them were born into great poverty, but they all have a story.
Yeah.
And they all deserve, at least
Something
for their humanity,
better.
to be recognized.
Yeah,
And we all deserve a chance to retell, to redo, to make up for past mistakes. I don't want to be a person who walks by people.
Right. I'm not. Yeah, that was a nice line as well. The alley smelled of time. That was.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was. Yeah. I mean, it reminds us to be more human with each other,
which is what we desperately need all the
now,
time,
yeah.
especially in times like now. And that's what storytelling is good for. That's why we need to have these stories, and why we need to keep telling and keep listening and keep encouraging each other, because that's how we'll survive. That's how we retain the memory of who we actually want to be instead of who we need to be in that moment.
Right. Have you ever seen that TV show that was it was started in the 60s, I think, called Seven or Seven Up?
Yes, I saw it.
It's
I
an
saw
English.
the movie. I saw it as a movie.
Yeah, it's a documentary, and what they did, they took these 7-year-olds. It's an old Quaker saying that like take the 7-year-old and I'll show you the man. And
Hmm.
what the documentary did was they took a whole bunch of 7-year-olds from all sorts of different demographics, class in England, and tracked them. And they went back at the age 14, and then every 7 years they would go and visit until they got to about like these people in their 40s and 50s. And one of the boys, the ones that I most identified with, I have to say, at the beginning, he ended up being a drug addict and homeless, and it was so sad. I mean, his dream when he wanted to be was an astronaut, and like
Uh,
he found some kind of space to fly into, but it was really interesting to watch how these people's lives changed and morphed, and it was really good. It was really good stuff. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, then I highly recommend it. And there's a bunch. I mean, there's one every 7 years
yeah,
from the age of 7 up. So that's
yeah. I'll
quite
take a look. I saw it. I think I was in my early 30s when I saw it, so that was 20 years ago. One of the
right.
things I think about is what my younger self would think of this life that I'm living now. When I was
I
in
often think
school,
that too.
I
Yeah.
was going to be a great novelist and
Uh-huh.
or an English professor. Um, and I I think about ways that my younger self would be profoundly disappointed in who I am, and also really impressed. And it's an interesting mental exercise. I've actually
Yeah.
crafted some stories around that, around having
Oh,
that
you have?
conversation with my younger self. I haven't shared them publicly. They don't feel like they're ready yet, but it's a fun mental exercise to play. I think that
Well,
she
if
would be delighted that I'm a storyteller, that I make my living in the arts, and she would think I can hear her saying, "Wow, cool."
right.
Um, I think that she would be disappointed that I wasn't out at all the rallies that were happening recently, very angry at me for that.
Yeah.
Um, so, but here we are.
I know that's so funny because I've actually done the same thing. It's like when because I look at my son, right? He's 19. I think, what was I doing at 19? And then when I start thinking that, I think, well, what was I thinking of doing when I was 19? Because Aiden doesn't know what he wants to do.
Hmm.
He's got some ideas, but there's nothing that's solid right now. And the
Yep.
world is changing so quickly. And I'm like, well, when I was that age, I was doing this, this, and this. And I'm like, well, what did you want to be? What did I want to be then? And it was like a rock star or a drummer, something like that. And
Yep.
it's the same as you. It's like, oh, you're in the arts, great, but you're a storyteller. What's that about?
Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
It's kind of
Yep.
odd. It's kind of odd. Ah, dear. So, is there anything else you want to share with us?
I'm really happy to be here. I love these kinds of conversations that dig in.
Yeah.
That's my favorite way of communicating is going deep. Um, I'm really happy we're friends.
Yes, me too.
Um, I guess the other thing that I'd like to say about is to spend a moment thinking about vulnerability. That the vulnerability that we as storytellers can choose to engage in can be immensely powerful. Um, we need to be careful about it so our audiences are able to experience their own feelings, whatever those feelings may be. So
Hmm.
they're not too worried about taking care of us as we're performing these vulnerable stories. But I think there is real power in, even if it's a funny story, approaching it with an air of vulnerability. I have a personal story. So, for everybody listening to this, I'm about to use the accurate word for a piece of male anatomy. So, if you are listening with someone who might not find that word easy, um, wait, turn off the volume. I'll pause. I'll say the sentence, and then I'll pause again so you don't have to hear it.
Sounds good. One ready?
Okay, so perhaps my funniest story is about when I was a little girl and I wanted to be a paleontologist, a fireman, and the president. I was told I couldn't do that because I was a little girl and not a little boy. So I made a penis out of tissues and I taped it on. And so the story is about that experience. I'm going to pause again in case anybody wants to make sure that they don't hear that word. We're good to go now. So it's a really funny story. It is the story that it's one of the few stories that I can guarantee people will laugh at, unless it's a really horrible day, in which case I wouldn't tell that story. But it takes some vulnerability to be able to talk about, as someone who is not transgender, as someone for whom that hasn't been, genitalia hasn't been a big part of my story in general. I've enjoyed it, but this story, it's saying when I was a kid, I had this experience of sexism, and I came up with a kid's solution to it. And it was a really creative solution for a little kid, but really the story is about what we are told we can and cannot do.
Right.
And by approaching that story with vulnerability and openness, even though it's funny, it means that the audience has permission to come in. So I guess what all of this is to say is that I am a deep believer that we as storytellers are in service to our audiences.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Mo, I hope to hear that too.
Yes, I've told Mo about you, and I said that you two need to get together and have a chat. So you should, Laura, you would love Mo. She's just this.
Well, I've really
spark
enjoyed
of energy.
The stories I've seen. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, she's just like that in real life. Like when she's not telling stories, she's.
So I think that we as storytellers need to remember that we are in service to the audience. And in fact, I think the best art of any art, that the audience is part of the equation, the viewer, the reader, whatever it may be, that we are not at odds with our audience. We may challenge them. I challenge my audiences a lot. I've had people walk out of concerts more than once because they were challenged by something that I said. In fact, the story I just alluded to, it's happened with that one several times, even though it's not a sexual story at all.
No,
but I think that if we remember that our job, that it is a collaborative creation process, then we will be so much better at what we do.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I'm actually going to share something with our audience here today as we're talking on this subject. Is that it's really important to gain the trust of the audience. Years ago, I was asked to do a performance up in Maine, and they wanted at least one Edgar Allan Poe story. So I learnt The Black Cat, and I updated it, told it in the first person as someone who was in prison on death row, who was, an abusive person, period. And because I was so nervous about the story, I made the biggest mistake of my career. And I was introduced, I climbed up on stage and said, "Hello, I'm an alcoholic, recovering from drug abuse," and went into the story. And I had 5 people, because the black cat, he sticks the corkscrew in the cat's eyes, right? And 5 people got up and walked out because they'd had that abuse in their lives at some point. And it was a massive trigger because I hadn't got the audience trusted. They had no idea who I was. There were some people who did. There was probably, there's probably like 50, 60 people there. And maybe 5 people knew who I was and knew the type of person that I was. And to start off with that story was a huge mistake. I tried to make it right because I knew the people involved and they knew some of the people that had walked out. And I was able to reach out to them, at least to a couple of them, and apologize and explain to them that I'm not that guy. And that, I was horrified that I'd upset them so much. But it's a really valuable lesson to learn, is that you have to gain the audience trust before you go into such a dark place, whether it's a personal dark place or even it's just a dark story. You need to make sure that the audience is with you. And I totally didn't do that.
I don't think any storyteller who's been doing it for any duration doesn't have some kind of story like that, where we made a massive misjudgment of what our audience wanted to hear.
Right.
I certainly do. Other storytellers I've talked with have had, and these are storytellers who, if we do any kind of challenging material, then at some point we're going to make a mistake.
Right.
And which isn't to say that you shouldn't have prefaced it, you shouldn't have given a content
Yes.
warning or something. And although content warnings 20 years ago were not what they are now,
Right.
I now routinely will give content warnings. And I find that if I give a content warning, even people who might have some issue with the story are usually fine with it because they know it's coming. I'm not surprising them.
Right.
And you can make the content warning vague enough that the story, the narrative structure, the suspense still holds together. But yeah, I think so early in my career, this is kind of my response to that, and maybe this is a good place to end. I'm not sure. Early in my career, when I was invited to the first festival I ever performed at, shortly before that festival, an older storyteller in my community, one of the scions of the community, told me that she didn't like my stories, that she thought I was inappropriate, that I used poor language, that I shouldn't be talking about sex and death, and that she didn't like the way I dressed. And this was before the moth, maybe even before the moth was even a thing. So it was before people were commonly tackling difficult topics in their stories.
Yeah.
And I was digging into tough stuff early on in my career as a storyteller, and I was telling these stories. She was someone who went regularly to the open mic where I did most of my practice, and so she really came down on me. And this was a couple months, I guess, before the festival, and I almost quit storytelling, or I thought maybe I should only tell traditional stories and only the easy ones, not the darker versions of Little Red Riding Hood or anything. And I was very close to quitting, but I had this commitment to go to this festival, so I went to the festival. And I didn't tell only non-challenging stuff, but I was very careful. I cut it way back. Elizabeth Ellis was also performing at this festival, and it was the first time I met her. And if anyone here doesn't know Elizabeth Ellis, she is a fantastic storyteller who now lives in Texas and has built a career out of looking like she's inoffensive, but actually telling very deep and meaningful stories. She's done a very good job of creating stories that really invite the listeners to explore their own hearts. So I was giving her a ride to the airport afterwards, and she was being lovely and supportive and saying nice things to this young storyteller. And I told her about what had happened and that I didn't know what to do. Should I stop telling difficult stuff? Should I quit altogether? And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, well, I like to think that any day that I don't piss someone off just isn't a very good day. So I'm a little wiser than I was then. You know, I know how to read an audience a little more. I'm a little more selective. I give some thought about what I might tell that has shock value and where. And I don't go for shock value. That's the wrong phrase, but that might get that sticky stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm less afraid of pissing people off now and then.
Yeah, I think age also has an effect. I mean, you know, I think when we get to a certain age, it's kind of like, you know what? I've lived long enough. I've spent most of my life worrying about what other people think. It's now time to chillax and just do what I want to do because there's not that much left.
Yep. So I guess what I want to end with is that what you and I have already talked about, that what we do is in service to ourselves, to be sure, but also in service to our audience. And we are truth speakers. And sometimes that means we got to say ahead of time, this story is going to lay a little truth on you.
Oh, I like that. Can I steal that?
Brother Blue, baby. It's from Brother Blue.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining with me. I miss you being, I mean, I haven't seen Tony Toledo down in Boston, but, you know, it's like when you were living in Boston, it was easy to see you, and I would bump into you every once in a while.
And hug. Hug.
Yes. Oh, my God. I do miss you, and
I miss you too.
I hope you're. I mean, it seems like you're super happy where you are.
I'm in a good place. Yeah. You know, it's like you. I struggle with depression, and this time does not make it any easier. But I'm okay.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, say hi to Charlie for me, and
I will. And thank you everyone who joined us. I really appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks everyone for joining us. As Laura said, I'll be back next Friday with a new guest. And I think it's Laura Sims. I need to
Oh,
double check,
wow.
but I think it's
Good.
Laura Sims. So we're doing a run of Laura's.
Yeah. Good planning. I approve.
I'm glad you do. Thank you. So thanks for being here. Everyone, thanks for joining us. And I'll see you either Wednesday for my kids thing or on Friday.
All right.
More
You can see
grown up
me
thing.
Monday, Wednesday, and Friday live on Facebook. I just forgot to mention that and wanted to get it in. Sorry.
Oh, so can you say that again?
So if you go to my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Lara Packer Storyteller, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 4 Central, I share stories for everyone. So they are, in fact, folk tales from around the world that may not always be interesting to kids, but are at least not going to horrify them.
And they're really good stories too. I've dropped in on a couple of your things, usually by accident because you pop up and you're like, oh, I'm going to watch this because I'm in the middle of something else.
I've seen yours the same way.
I think that's how a lot of us do. And if you want to, I just want to remind people, because as I was thinking about this, the story cards are available at etsy.com/shop/storylora. And they're really good.
Sarah, yes, it's 5 p.m. Eastern.
5? Yeah. Oh, yes. Sarah. Sorry, yes.
All right, Simon, then. Love you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Love you too. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.